moved into the apartment building in October because it was the only place near my job that still had vacancies. It was a narrow 4-story brick building with one entrance, one elevator, and long hallways that ran straight down the middle of each floor. My unit was 3C, halfway between the elevator and the back stairwell. Across from me was 3B. Its blinds were always shut, and I never saw anyone go in or out. The landlord told me 3B was occupied by a night worker who slept during the day, so I should keep music low and avoid knocking unless there was an emergency. I worked mornings at a clinic and usually got home around 5. For the first week, I only noticed one thing about the apartment across from mine. Every evening, the deadbolt would click exactly once at 6:12. I noticed it because the walls were thin and the sound carried through the hallway. No footsteps came before it, and none followed after it. Just the metal turn of a lock, then silence. One Friday, I got home late after dinner with coworkers and checked my phone in the hall while unlocking my door. At 6:12, right on schedule, the deadbolt across from me clicked anyway. That was the first time I looked closely at 3B. The knob was old brass, worn bright around the edges, but the deadbolt above it looked newer than anything else in the building. There were 2 tiny scratches in the paint beside the keyway, fresh enough that the wood underneath still looked pale. I put my ear near the door and listened. Nothing. No television, no fan, no movement, no breathing. The next Monday, someone knocked on my door at 11:40 p.m. I checked the peephole and saw an empty hallway. When I opened the door, 3B was closed like always. I stepped out and looked both directions. No one near the elevator, no one by the stairwell. As I turned back toward my unit, I heard the deadbolt in 3B click once behind me. I spun around and stared at the door. Nothing else happened. I knocked once, then harder. No answer. I called the landlord the next morning and told him someone in 3B was messing with me. He sounded annoyed more than concerned. He said the tenant worked rotating hospital shifts and probably forgot I was new. Then he told me not to start trouble with neighbors I had never met. After that, I started paying attention to the hallway sounds. Most apartments had routines you could learn without trying. The couple in 3A argued around dinner. The student in 3D left every morning at 7:10 with heavy boots. But 3B never made normal sounds. No shower running, no microwave beeps, no phone ringing, no television through the wall. Only that single deadbolt turn at 6:12, and sometimes the late knocking. 2 weeks later, I came home carrying groceries and found a paper bag hanging from my doorknob. Inside was the jar of pasta sauce I had forgotten at the self-checkout the night before. My receipt was tucked beside it. I knew it was mine because the cashier had circled a coupon on the back in blue pen. Someone had taken it from the store and brought it here. I knocked on 3B immediately. No answer. I knocked again and said through the door that whoever returned the bag could have just left it outside. Silence. Then, from somewhere inside the apartment, I heard a phone vibrate against wood. It buzzed twice and stopped. I waited another 10 seconds before stepping back. As soon as I reached my own door, the deadbolt in 3B turned once. That night, I asked the woman in 2C if she knew anything about the tenant across from me. She said nobody had lived there since summer. I told her the landlord said otherwise. She shrugged and said he sometimes claimed units were occupied, so people would not ask to transfer into them when repairs were needed. Then she added that maintenance had changed the locks on 3B twice. The next evening I came upstairs from the laundry room and saw 3B open 3 inches. The hall light reached into a narrow slice of the apartment. I stopped moving immediately. After a second, the door drifted wider by itself, slow enough that I knew someone on the other side was pulling it. I saw part of a kitchen table, stacked boxes, and a man's shoe beside the frame. Then the door shut hard. I ran downstairs and called the landlord from outside the building. He arrived 20 minutes later looking furious. Not worried, furious. We went upstairs together. He unlocked 3B with a master key and pushed the door open. The apartment was empty except for dust, one folding chair near the peephole, and a cooler with melted ice inside. No boxes, no table, no shoe. The back window was raised 3 inches. I asked who had been inside it. He said nothing at first, then admitted a former tenant had kept a copied key after being evicted months earlier. The man would sometimes get and stay for a night and leave before anyone noticed. Ron had been trying to catch him quietly instead of calling the police because he did not want the building getting a reputation online. I told him that someone had returned my groceries and knocked on my door for weeks. He looked genuinely surprised for the first time and asked why I had not said that sooner. I reminded him I had called twice. He said he thought I meant another tenant. Then he walked to the folding chair, sat in it, and looked through the peephole into the hallway, exactly where my front door stood. Everything clicked into place then. The single deadbolt turn at 6:12 had never been a person locking up after work. It was someone testing whether I was home yet. The late knocks were to see how fast I checked the peephole. Returning the grocery bag was proof he could follow me outside the building and come back inside without me noticing. I felt sick standing there. The landlord changed the locks that night and said he would hire security for the weekend. I did not stay to hear the rest. I packed clothes, my laptop, and whatever fit in 2 laundry baskets and went to my sister's house. Around 2 in the morning, Marlene from 3A texted me asking why officers were in the hallway with flashlights. I never answered. I came back the next afternoon while movers from another building were carrying boxes downstairs. My apartment door was unlocked because the landlord was waiting inside. He told me they had found the former tenant hiding in the trash room after trying to leave through the rear exit. In his backpack were snacks, gloves, spare batteries, and a notebook with dates beside apartment numbers. Next to 3C was my work schedule. I broke the lease that week and moved somewhere newer with exterior doors and cameras at every entrance. What stayed with me was not that he had been inside an empty unit across from mine. It was how ordinary all of it sounded while it was happening. A lock turning once, 3 knocks, a bag returned by a helpful neighbor. Small things that only become terrifying after you learn why they happened. I moved into the new building because I wanted somewhere secure after 2 bad roommates. The place was a 7-story complex with key fob elevators, cameras in every lobby, and bright carpeted hallways that smelled like detergent. My unit was 7E near the far corner. Across from me was 7F, and beside it, at the dead end, was a service door marked Staff Only. The leasing agent bragged that nobody could reach our floor without a resident fob or management code. For the first month, nothing strange happened beyond normal apartment noise. Then one Tuesday, I came home from work and found a rolling housekeeping cart parked outside 7F. It held towels, spray bottles, and a stack of folded sheets. I assumed management was cleaning after a move-out, so I ignored it. The cart was still there the next morning. No towels missing, no doors open, no workers nearby. When I returned that evening, it had moved 10 feet closer to my door. I only noticed because one wheel squeaked and left a gray mark on the carpet. I checked the hallway camera dome near the elevator, hoping to see whether it was active, but the lens was dark behind tinted plastic. I emailed management asking if maintenance was working on 7. They replied the next day saying no projects were scheduled on my floor and asking for a photo. By the time I got home, the cart was gone. 2 hours later, somebody knocked on my door twice very softly. Through the peephole, I saw the cart sitting alone outside 7F again, but nobody standing near it. I opened the door immediately. The hallway was empty from end to end. My neighbor in 7D cracked his door and asked if I needed something. I asked whether he had heard knocking. He said he heard the service door open then shut, but nobody pass his apartment. When I looked back, the cart had been turned around so the handle faced me. The next night, I waited inside with my lights off and the peephole uncovered. At 11:18, the service door opened a few inches. A hand slid out first, holding the cart handle. Then a man in a Navy janitor shirt eased into the hallway and pulled the cart after him without making noise. He kept his head down and pushed it straight to my door. I stepped back from the peephole and held my breath. The cart stopped outside. Nothing happened for maybe 15 seconds. Then metal touched my lock very lightly. A scrape, then another scrape like someone trying keys one by one. I shouted through the door that I was calling security. The hallway went silent. Wheels squeaked hard and rolled away fast. I ran out after 10 seconds expecting an empty corridor. Instead, the cart was halfway to the elevator, and the man was pressing the call button repeatedly. He looked older than I expected, maybe 50, with gray hair and a building badge flipped backward on his chest. When he saw me, he said room service and smiled like it was a joke nobody asked for. Security never came because there was no overnight desk guard, only a remote number on the lease packet. By the time I reached the elevator, the doors had closed on him and the cart. Management answered my email the next morning with obvious panic. They asked me not to discuss it with residents and said a contractor had accessed the floor without authorization. I would have moved then if my lease allowed it. Instead, I bought a wedge for my door and stayed alert. 3 nights passed quietly. On the 4th, I returned from dinner and found a small package outside my apartment with my name typed neatly on the label. No sender, no postage, no tracking sticker. Inside was one brass key taped to an index card. The card said, "Try the service door." I took it downstairs to management immediately. The leasing manager went pale when she read it and finally explained everything. The man had worked nights cleaning common areas for a vendor they fired 6 months earlier. He learned old master keys had never been collected and sometimes let himself into vacant units to sleep. When the vendor changed crews, he kept returning because nobody recognized him in uniform. The cart made him invisible. Residents held doors for him, and cameras ignored someone who looked like staff. He had been caught once checking handles on lower floors, but talked his way out by claiming he was replacing air filters. They thought changing codes would stop him. I asked why he targeted my door. She hesitated, then said my apartment had belonged to a tenant who traveled often and left spare cash inside. He probably expected the same easy routine when I moved in. That night, management changed every service lock and stationed a real guard in the lobby. I still heard wheels once around midnight. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing except the cart parked by the service door. The hallway was empty, yet one bottle on the top shelf was rocking slowly, as if it had just been set down. I did not open my door. In the morning, the cart was gone again, but a fresh scratch ran across the brass key he had mailed me, where someone had tested it in a lock. 2 evenings later, the elevator opened on 7, and nobody stepped out. I only noticed because I was carrying laundry back and heard the chime behind me. When I turned, the doors were closing on an empty cab. Then from the far end of the hall came the squeak of that same wheel. I left the basket where it was and went straight down the stairs. Management reviewed footage after that and called me into the office. The camera inside the elevator showed the cart entering alone from the parking level. No person pushed it. It simply rolled in and stopped where the doors closed. A minute later, on 7, the doors opened, and the cart came out already moving, as if someone just outside frame had taken hold of it. That was enough for me to break the lease despite the penalty. While I packed, neighbors admitted they had seen the same man for months on different floors carrying towels or tool bags. Nobody questioned him because everybody assumes workers belong where residents do not. On my last trip to the car, I found the brass key standing upright on the carpet outside my door. There was no note this time, just the key balanced carefully on its teeth, like someone wanted proof they had been there after management changed everything. I left it where it was and drove away. What stayed with me was how little disguise he needed. A badge, a cart, and confidence were enough to make every locked floor feel open. Months later, I visited a friend in another building downtown and saw a housekeeping cart outside her hallway laundry room. My chest tightened so fast, it embarrassed me. I walked over and checked every shelf before I could stop myself. Clean towels, paper cups, tiny soaps. Nothing wrong at all. But I still took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator alone. That memory never really left, even after moving away. I moved into the building in January because it had interior hallways and a locked front entrance. At the time, I worked early shifts at a bakery and usually left home before sunrise. So a place where I could walk from my apartment to the elevator without stepping outside sounded perfect. My unit was 5D near the middle of the 5th floor. 4 apartments faced each other around a square section of hallway, with longer corridors leading to each stairwell. Across from me was 5C, occupied by a quiet graduate student named Lena. I never learned who lived in 5B because I never saw them. One morning, I opened my door for work and found a strip of clear tape running from the frame onto the door itself, thin enough that I almost missed it. It tore when I opened the door. I assumed management had marked something for repairs and left. That evening, there was another strip in the same place. This time, I checked the neighboring doors. Lena's had one near the knob. 5A had one low by the bottom hinge. 5B had none at all. I peeled mine off and knocked on Lena's to mention it. She looked confused and said she thought I was joking. The next morning, both pieces of tape were back. Lena stood in the hallway holding hers between 2 fingers. She asked if I had put it there. I said no. We checked the other doors together. 5A still had a fresh strip. 5B still had nothing. When Lena knocked there, nobody answered. We emailed management and got a bland reply saying no employee was using tape on resident doors. They suggested children from another floor might be pranking us. There were no children in the building that either of us had ever seen. That night, I put a chair beside my door and listened. At night, the hallway latch clicked softly. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a dark hoodie moving from my door to Lena's. He pressed something against her frame, then walked calmly toward the west stairwell. I yanked my door open at once, but by the time I reached the corner, he was gone. I told management the next day and asked for camera footage. They said the 5th floor cameras only covered elevators, not residential hallways. The manager also asked whether I was sure it had been a resident and not a delivery person. No delivery person works hallways at 2 in the morning. Lena bought a small door camera after that. 2 nights later, she knocked on my door, shaking, and showed me the clip. It captured the same hoodie stopping at 5A first, touching the tape there, then coming to ours. He never looked at the lens, like he already knew where it was. 5A belonged to an older couple who traveled often. We told them everything when they returned. The husband checked his lock and found scratches near the keyway. Nothing missing inside, but drawers in their entry table had been opened. He changed the lock that afternoon and thanked us twice. After that, the tape stopped for about a week. Then one Friday, I came home before dawn because the bakery freezer had failed. The 5th floor lights were dimmed for scheduled maintenance. Halfway down the hall, I saw a shape crouched beside my door. When I shouted, it stood and ran toward the east stairwell. I chased him 3 steps before common sense returned. Instead, I slammed my own door, locked it, and called Lena. She opened immediately and let me wait inside, while we listened to footsteps pound down the stairs. Then a door below us opened and closed. After that, silence. The police never came because neither of us wanted to sit for hours over a trespasser who was already gone, and management kept insisting they would handle it privately. Instead, the superintendent changed the bulb timing so the hall stayed bright overnight. He also promised extra patrols that nobody ever saw. 2 days later, Lena asked if I had moved her doormat. I had not. Someone had turned it sideways and tucked a folded grocery receipt underneath. On the back, in neat block letters, was written, "Home early today." We both stared at it for a long time. That message changed everything. Someone had noticed my schedule closely enough to know I was home hours earlier than usual. Management finally took us seriously and searched empty units on the floor above and below. They found nothing. I spent the next week staying with my sister, only returning during daylight for clothes and mail. On Wednesday evening, I came back with my brother to grab the rest. The hallway looked normal until he pointed at 5B. A thin line of light showed under the door. That apartment was supposed to be vacant. I knew because management had told us the plumbing there was being redone after a leak. My brother knocked hard and called out. No answer. He knocked again. This time we heard something scrape across the floor inside, then stop completely. We went downstairs for the superintendent and came back with him and another maintenance worker carrying a master key. The first key did not turn because the lock had been changed from inside. The superintendent swore under his breath. Then the worker shouldered the door twice until the chain snapped. The apartment smelled stale and hot. Curtains were pinned shut with binder clips. In the living room sat a folding table covered in notebooks, batteries, bottled water, and printed photos of our hallway. One wall had hand-drawn maps of each floor with apartment numbers circled. The bathroom held a mattress on the tile and stacks of instant noodle cups. In the bedroom closet, we found the hoodie, rolls of clear tape, spare deadbolts, and a ring of copied building keys. Whoever had been staying there was gone through the back fire stairs. Management called everyone on 5 into the lobby that night and admitted a former locksmith hired during renovations had kept access after quitting. He knew which units were empty and how to replace locks quietly. They said he was targeting apartments for burglary, but the notebook said more than that. Beside several apartment numbers were notes about routines: leaves at 4:40, returns alone, dog walked at 9. Next to mine was a list of dates when I worked opening shifts. Next to Lena's was one sentence: watches haul too much. I still think about that. I moved out before the month ended. Lena transferred to student housing near campus. The building installed cameras at every corridor entrance and changed all locks again. A week later, the superintendent emailed saying someone had tried the rear service door after midnight, but could not get in. What stayed with me was how patient it had all been. Weeks of tape checks, quiet knocks, and moved doormats, just to learn who noticed things and who ignored them. If I had kept sleeping through those first small sounds, nothing would have warned me at all. For months afterward, I would stop before opening any apartment door and look at the frame first. Tape residue, fresh scratches, fibers caught in the latch. My friends joked that I had become paranoid. Maybe that's true. But paranoia feels different when you once found notebooks with your hours inside them. Even now, whenever I hear 3 soft knocks in a hallway, I wait and listen before answering. I learned that secure buildings only keep strangers out when everyone inside acts like strangers cannot already belong there at all anymore.